civilization. Uh, but regardless, these memes, if we can call them that, are really what's driving the civilization now,
Right.
and they're all
I think
tied back to a
Alfred's
very
here.
important thing. Alfred, you with us?
Yes, I'm being dropped in a strange way, but I'm back.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm like, that's kind of odd, but carry on.
Well, we're in a very interesting time when we're actually literally seeing prophecy being fulfilled. However, the way that the prophecies run and the way that the rulers of this system of evil intend to take us are two different directions. And we are on a conjoined timeline now where we're starting to become awake. More and more people are waking up to what's going on and saying, hey, there's a problem. And they're looking for that positive timeline to move over to. And that is this critical time that we're in right now. And Alfred and I have been following it for a little over a year now, and pretty much everything that we've said has come to pass. And more things are coming, right, Alfred?
Well, yes. I think that what I would say is that uh, the matrix powers are running on a timeline that doesn't exist anymore. As of December 21st, 2012, or some say other dates, objectively, this time space hologram that we're in, the timeline that our collective on Earth is on, that timeline we shifted to a positive timeline structurally, and all the fun and games that they've planned for this end game were planned on a different timeline, starting going back many thousands of years. And going back to the Egyptian times, going back several hundred years to when the first and second chapter of the Illuminati were founded. The first chapter in 1775 in Bavaria by a Jesuit priest, um, Adam Weishaupt, in 1776. The second chapter of the Illuminati was founded in New Haven, Connecticut, at my alma mater, by the name of Skull and Bones. Although the surface story is that it was founded in 1832 as a chapter of a German secret fraternity. And so all of those plans, which are part of the catastrophic timeline, they're on a timeline that doesn't exist anymore. So they're kind of spinning their wheels, and all of the false flags that they're attempting to get off, including their most recent one of Ebola Gate. They're just videos that are being released now that we've posted on our Ebola group, are using crisis actors. So we have the same old phony story, and it turns out that at the 2014 Bilderberger Group meeting in Copenhagen, which Ole Damegard did a couple of interviews for us from there, and he was able to discover, which we actually showed it on Exopolitics TV, we showed a satanic symbol which the Bilderberger Group released from that hotel in Copenhagen. It turns out that there were a lot of bioweapon scientists at that Bilderberger meeting, and that the mayor of Atlanta was flown there, and nobody could figure out, well, why is the mayor of Atlanta being flown there? He's kind of a nobody. And now, in retrospect, well, the mayor of Atlanta, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, which is together with the WHO, the World Health Organization, is two of the main implementers of the false flag, of the Ebola Gate false flag. And the mayor of Atlanta is kind of the local authority for the CDC and the implementer of the first death of Ebola on American soil. And guess where it was? In Dallas, where who was killed there? John F. Kennedy. So it turns out that at the 2014 Bilderberger was where the plans probably, no, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. In other words, false flags always have many different levels, and one level is a symbolic level. So the good nation, the United States, was killed, was assassinated through the ritual of assassinating the President of the United States in Dealey Plaza. It was planned as this ritual, 11/22/63, and there are all these things. And so they did the ritual of killing the first Ebola patient in Dallas. And that has to do with the false flag. You know, the Ebola killing is all a ritual. And that was all planned and given the green light at the 2014 Bilderberger conference in Copenhagen, which nobody understood at the time. And now, in retrospect, the fact that the mayor of Atlanta was flown to the Bilderbergers and given a speaking spot, and that bioweapon scientists were prominently there and, you know, probably giving them briefings, it becomes clear that the secret topic that was discussed was the planned Ebola genocide, which makes everyone in that building probably a co-conspirator to genocide under the Geneva Conventions. And if there were any kind of inside the matrix, if there were any kind of a justice system
where the money meant something, and had that been, interestingly enough, had that been carried out, the dollar today, a treasury dollar, would be worth about 20 or so Federal Reserve notes, about 22, 23 Federal Reserve notes. Could you imagine what our economy would be like with that? So you know, when Kennedy died, the other thing that Kennedy didn't want to do was give Israel anything to do, any parts that they needed to make nuclear weapons, and he didn't want to get involved in Vietnam. So it's like, okay, pick a number of people that he upset, and you don't have to go far to find somebody to do the job. And seeing as all these entities are tied in together, right, at the highest levels, it's really difficult. I mean, it's really easy to derail somebody's prime objective.
Right, and they had to get Kennedy off the board. And Alfred, what is the reason with the Ebola? What's the end game for that? You can carry on, please.
And it's the final implementation of the New World Order here and the original Georgia Guidestones, or at least the catastrophic timeline end of them, and that is the reduction of the world's population down to 500 million from 7 billion, and the utter destruction of the American people and of the American Republic for having rebelled against the British Crown and having successfully maintained that revolution for over 200 years. And so that is the greater significance of Ebola, and or at least the plan of Ebola. And so the last four presidents have been essentially CIA assets, groomed, pre-identified by CIA, DARPA time travel, and groomed, all of them groomed since 1971 to serve as CIA assets in the destruction of America under a New World Order principle, up to and including the Obama, who was pre-identified as a 10-year-old boy. That is, he was pre-identified in 1971 that that Barack Obama on January 20th, 2009 would be sworn in as President of the United States. And from the time from 1971 forward, and from the time that he was 18 forward, when he enrolled at Occidental College as a foreign student under Fulbright, he was knowingly groomed to be president of the United States, and was a full-time CIA operative in that role. So that in terms of the New World Order's agenda right now, their agenda right now is the destruction of the United States and of its people. And that's the role, the intended role of Ebola Gate. Now, fortunately, at least from my analysis, and Peter can come in from other points of view. Number one, the positive timeline shifted. We shifted onto a positive timeline on December 21st, 2012, or other dates in that vicinity. Number two, the portal at the core of our universe started to broadcast waves of unity consciousness, which is we are one, as opposed to duality consciousness, which is I win, you lose, which is what the matrix consciousness has been very powerfully for a long time in this quadrant of the universe, for at least 300,000 years since the predatory intervention of the Anunnaki ETs that occupied Earth starting 300,000 years ago, or even before, where there was a form of rebellion in this planet, in this quadrant of the galaxy in the spiritual dimensions that people call the Lucifer Rebellion. But this has been a very afflicted area of the planet. But now we're coming to its end game, and what has transformed, at least for the benefit of those of us who are at the service of the light and service of others, is that we've now shifted structurally. We've shifted there's two major structural changes. Number one, we've shifted onto a positive timeline. And number two, the morphic field around us is that of unity consciousness. People who want to go into this more in depth, we have a 25-page paper at positivefuture.info. This positivefuture.info that sets out an equation and then sets out the evidence for this equation, and that is a positive future equals a positive timeline plus unity consciousness. And then there's a whole explanation of how this happens, that the predicted catastrophes for June 2013, which were a global coastal event, from some large celestial body landing in the oceans and creating massive tsunamis, which had been predicted by DARPA, CIA chronovisor probes from the year 1971, by Edgar Cayce in his Earth Changes remote viewing. I wrote a book on that called The Age of Cataclysm, which integrated the Cayce predictions with modern Earth sciences, geology and seismology, and also the largest military-trained remote viewing study in history by the Farsight Institute under Dr. Courtney Brown was conducted in 2010. They were looking for the effects of global warming and expecting to find, a few inches of water coming up on the beach. Instead, what they found was a global coastal event in June of 2013. And that was the convergence of their finding plus the DARPA study of 1971, which found the U.S. Supreme Court under 100 feet of brackish water in 2013, plus the Edgar Cayce remote viewing, which found the U.S. eastern seaboard underwater, Japan under the ocean, massive global coastal events. Well, that didn't occur in June 2013. Oh, did you? Yeah, and
I have a feeling we lost. Oh, you're back. Okay, we lost you there for a second.
What Courtney Brown concluded was that,
about 4
that event
seconds. Go
occurred,
ahead.
but it occurred in another dimension, i.e., on another timeline. So our timeline has shifted. So all of these plans, the Ebola Gate, World War III, all of that, have been planned on another timeline. So these guys are like trying to implement them in this timeline, and it's just not working. And as far as being knocked off air now, I was knocked off Facebook earlier today, and I spent all day trying to, rebuilding a new profile. I just got back some information right before airtime. I thought it was due to, one particular article or another. And the feedback that I got was this, that the order came down to get Weber off Facebook. And the reason that was given is not any one article or the other. It was to stop Weber. So I just wanted to state that on the air.
Well, that's what they try to do, Alfred. As you recall, 10 days ago, or pretty close to it, I had a similar event happen where all of a sudden I couldn't post anything on my page, and then nobody else could post anything on my page, and then my page was shut down, and I'm like, okay, there's a reason for this. And I kept on getting a message saying, "Oh, Facebook." Finally, I couldn't even get into my own account, and I got the message saying, "Facebook will be back momentarily. We are doing maintenance." Aha! I wonder whose account you're doing maintenance on. So eventually, they let me back in, but it was still the same thing. So okay, obviously, the message that is presented is bothering them tremendously, to the point of, what do these guys know? That we shouldn't allow them to speak anymore. And that's really the truth of the matter. It's a matter of silencing us. This isn't paranoia. Uh, let's see. 2 weeks after I sent my manuscript for Letters to Earth to my publisher, my phones were tapped. I was in the communications industry. I was a bellhead, knowing that how this stuff worked. And I'm listening to my phone and I'm saying, why is it going through 2 extra switches? And why is it going through an analog switch at all? It should be all digital. And so it didn't take too long for me to figure out that my phones were tapped, and that they certainly were. So, and I'm sure they still are. And so they do all these things as a level of, we got too close to the truth. But now it doesn't matter, because they think that they can win this with Ebola Gate and with, we'll call it ISIS Gate right next to it. And here's the interesting thing. When we look back for a year, for over a year, starting in 2012, we were told about the greatest comet ever for civilization in civilization's lifetime, and this being Comet Ison. And then everybody started, the rumor mill started, oh, this is, the Nibiru coming back, or the mothership, or whatever the case it might be. And I was like, no, this is a comet, but the timing is interesting. And then people started doing recalculation of the last Mayan Baktun, and I don't know, maybe they forgot to count the 0 year, or however they do the calculation. I'm not an expert in that area. But toward the end of the summer in 2013, I was starting to get several different reports saying that they miscalculated on the long Baktun. It ends December 16th. So actually, December 16th starts the new Baktun. So that was the return of Quetzalcoatl, which means that Ison would have been the sign for the feathered snake god in the sky. And on the 16th, it would have been perfectly aligned between Earth and Venus had it survived. And we would have seen something like a giant exclamation point. The whole world would have seen this right at dusk. And it would have served as a sign for the Mayan prophecies. Interesting. So, yes, we have entered a new Baktun. But as we can see, the world didn't come to an end. But what did we get? We didn't get Comet Ison, but instead we got the 10 Days of Mandela, which starts, oddly enough, at the beginning of the Festival of Lights of Hanukkah. Now, Nelson Mandela is a Knight of Malta who allegedly, we all thought, died June 26, 2013. But here he is officially dead on the 5th of December. And he's interned on the 15th, the day before the alignment with Comet Ison, or where we would have seen it. And all of this winds up, let's see, on the 5th, the day of Nelson Mandela's death, is the last day of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. So, is this by coincidence? Come on. And now you've got over 90 world leaders with the top security people of the world, and these guys are standing next to a crazy man signing and claiming that he's seeing angels flying around inside the arena that they have the eulogy for Mandela in. Seriously? What kind of ritual is this? And they had the whole world watching for 10 days. CNN crammed it down your throat. Every place from CNN to Beijing News was cramming it down people's throats. We got to see a ritual here.
What was the real number? Was it 91 or 93 of guests that attended?
91 or 93, one or the other.
Yeah, it was never pinned down for me. I was just curious if anyone had a final head count.
I think it was 93. But over 90 regardless. But still, Obama was there. Obama's standing next to a crazy man who's signing in a language nobody can understand. I see a familiar sign every now and then. My grandparents were deaf, and my mother's a certified translator. So I know just a little bit about sign language, and I didn't see anything I recognized. Well, occasionally I'd see something that looked familiar.
Yeah.
But and then all the experts came out and said, "Who is this guy? And what's he trying to tell us? Because we can't read it." And so we watch this ritual. Now, after the 10 Days of Mandela, the revolt, the revolution in Ukraine goes hot. People are getting killed in the streets in the same exact location that I had my apartment in when I lived in Kiev. Seriously, I could walk out the front door of my apartment, take 10 steps, and be right in the middle of the revolution, right where people were dying. And that didn't happen when I was there 10 years ago. It was 11, 10 years ago, and I'm seeing these people die. And then we get the Ebola outbreak in Africa. And then ISIS comes to power, all after the 10 days of Mandela. So from this event that never happened. Now, if we did see Comet Ison, how would things have played out?
PSYOP.
Interesting. So what's, yeah, an off-planet PSYOP. And that's where it brings us. When you look at the actual image that all of these world leaders stood behind, what was it? We saw a phoenix rising from a pyramid with a sunburst behind its head, and underneath that was a symbol for Africa. Wait a minute, is that ISIS rising on the back of Africa? And we see the terrorist group ISIS, which has had phenomenal abilities here, considering that they're supposed to be a ragtag terrorist group. Boy, they sure have been trained very well.
Yeah, too well.
And we have the Ebola outbreak in Africa. So you look at the symbol that these people stood behind. You listen to the testimony of this alleged crazy man who's seeing these angels fly. Were they fallen angels? Because one can only look at the acts or the alleged acts that are being carried out by ISIS and saying these are nothing but pure demonic.
Well, Alfred, these rituals that are occurring, I don't know, they seem to get more and more elaborate.
In other words,
but they seem to run along the same kind of theme.
We published an article on our Ebolagate blog, which, if people just Google Ebolagate, you'll get taken to our Ebolagate blog, which there are a lot of the entire blog is filled with articles, sometimes 2 or 3 a day, which deconstruct this bioweapons false flag as it's occurring. And there's an integral thematics between the false flags of ISIS and the false flags of Ebolagate, because they're all coming out of the same playbook. And ISIS, for example, we now know, and there are many different witnesses to this, including a U.S. Army counterintelligence officer who went public last week, and that is that the CIA and the Union Bank of Switzerland serve as a conduit for the funding of ISIS. So you can do an equation. U.S. government equals CIA equals Al-Qaeda equals Israel, UK, US equals ISIS, i.e., the technology of war. War is an industrial activity. It's like any other industrial activity, except that the industrial activity of war, the way you make money is that you run both sides of the war. By running both sides of the war, you make money on the arms of both sides. You make money on the damage that they cause, because then you rebuild, You make money on lending money to all of the states and the armament factories that produce it, because you own the armament factories, and you make money on all the destruction and on the rebuilding and the shuffling back and forth, and all the people that killed have to be buried, and all of that. And so you make money on all of that. And then from a dimensional point of view, you're making kind of interdimensional money by giving payoffs to the interdimensional dark forces who like to feed off of the negative energy of the dying, which Peter can talk to you about. And so that's why the industry of war works well. Now, there's a symbiotic relationship. Yes, Lush. And there's a symbiotic relationship between the negative dimensions of the negative ETs and some of the negative entities on the satanic and the luciferic spectrums, and the negative matrix powers here, the Illuminati, the bloodline bankers, the satanic monarchies like the British monarchy, the Dutch monarchy, the Belgian monarchy, the Spanish monarchy. They're highly satanic entities. So they're all in symbiosis that then they also hook into the archons. So war is one of the principal ways that they generate a lot of what they feed off of. Yeah.
So they need a never-ending war, basically.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, if you go back to the beginning, well, I'd rather go back to the Anunnaki beginning, because there it's on a much more grand scale. What we know is from the Anunnaki texts that they essentially gave us religion and government, and that's been the source of division and war through every world empire since. And we start counting the world empires with Egypt. Now, we can't underestimate the interdimensional side of this, or maybe the multidimensional side of it is actually more accurate. But when you translate Anunnaki, it directly translates as we from heaven come. Now, what do you look at from the scriptures? Oh, angels. What are angels? Well, they're God's messengers from heaven. Well, where is this heaven? We know through string theory, M theory, and superstring theory a lot more about, quote, heaven than what we used to think of it as a place where God lived and angels played harps. Or at least they like to listen to harp music. It's a whole different, once you look at it from a scientific viewpoint, it's a completely different situation. The other thing that has its commonality is DNA, genetics, our genome. They just have come to understand our genome has the information to recreate every life form on this planet back to the most simple cyanobacteria. All contained. You could take one human cell and go recreate a whole planet just on the human genome. So there's a tight tie into this, and understanding that brings us to this reality. But when we pick it up from the Anunnaki and then the Egyptian, but more so with Canaanite law or their gods, we get this god called Baal or Molech. Molech is actually a title. The first or the most recorded Molech, or it's tracked back to, is the Egyptian god Set. But the original Molech is believed to be Nimrod. Now, what was Molech's deal? He was a homosexual or bisexual god that required live child sacrifice. In the case of Baal, he was a fertility god where they would carry on orgies in the spring of the year to induce the rains because they thought it was the sperm from Baal fertilizing the ground, making the crops grow. And if this was your first time at the orgy and you got pregnant during the orgy, guess what? You got to offer your first fruits to Molech in the fall. And so this child sacrifice has been carried out through eternity right down to today. And Kevin Annette's done some fantastic work on this. So we cannot underestimate what is going on here. And when you look at all of the cultural religions that have been, look at the Mayans. They had, in one sacrifice, they sacrificed over 24,000 people. It took them several days to do it, and they did it at several temples, but 24,000 human hearts were cut out to please the gods. What is this? What's changed? Nothing. 500,000 kids a year vanish off the planet. What happens to them?
That's never even accounted for. People don't even take it into consideration. It makes me sick.
Talk about loosh. It's an industry. Child trafficking, child abuse, and child sacrifice is an industry. And who set it up? The Anunnaki. We're back off planet again. How do we get rid of the Anunnaki? You see, they're the ones that, when you go back into the scriptures, it's really interesting because you get the story, the Anunnaki story is that they created us from lower life forms. I have no problem with that. Somebody genetically engineered us. We certainly just didn't evolve. Since the Cambrian period, there's only been extinction level events on this planet. And that's recorded in fossil history. So we get now to modern man and a story from the Sumerian gods, and we get a story from the Hebrew god Yahweh or Yahuwah, and they're both pretty similar, except the scriptures tell us that humans were made in the image of this Yahuwah, or essentially the soul of the multiverse, what gives everything life. And we were put into a perfect body with perfect DNA. Now, here's the interesting thing. When you read the account, you move to the next phase of that, and it says that it's not good for man to be alone. We're going to make a helper for him. And what do we read in the scriptures? Genesis 2:21 through 23. There's the explanation of an operation. They put him to sleep. They open the flesh. They remove a rib. They close him up. They take the rib. They genetically engineer it into a female. They bring the female to him. And here's the interesting thing. Adam knows this. The first male knows this because he says, "At last, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone, you were taken from me. I'll call you woman." Now, they were both naked, and it says that, and they were good with it. Everybody was good with it. But then you get to this little thing that, oh, well, it's just a nice story of eating this fruit. What happens? They have a state change, and the state change puts them, they realize they're naked. They want to cover themselves. And then they hear the voice of God, and they get scared, and they go hide. Now, what happened? Prior, they were in alpha. There is no fight or flight in alpha. The fight or flight is in beta. So whatever took place that's tied in with this fruit, whether it's a nice story or not, there's no doubt that the world is in beta. Beta is where fear is. It's where the fight and flight response is. You can't have a fight and flight response in alpha. It just doesn't work. You can make love in alpha. That works real well. You can meditate in alpha. You can pray in alpha. Alpha is the gateway to theta, which is where you experience time warps, where our consciousness is not limited to the three-dimensional world. You go into delta, where people have had out-of-body experiences, and we start to realize our soul is not our body. Our body's stuck in the third dimension. Our consciousness is not. And so, wow, which one? Did we evolve from apes, or were we created in God's image, something that has the capability to leave the third dimension? Talk to anybody who's had a near-death experience, and everyone's had a different one, but they've all left the third dimension. Guess what? You get into delta, the laws of the third dimension do no longer apply to your consciousness. No, at any level, they don't apply to your consciousness. That's why you get instant ideas and feelings. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. Well, if you knew it was going to happen, why didn't you change the circumstances? Just that simple. And so this information here is extremely timely. We can turn around and look at these recorded events and these books that people say, oh, well, it's been changed, doesn't have any more meaning, they're a bunch of nice stories. Really, don't look at it through the religious eyes, look at it through scientific eyes, because it's all explained. Talking about genetic engineering 6,000 years ago. And who genetically engineered us? Well, when you do the homework, it turns out that the Watchers most likely were involved as part of the genetic engineers. And more than likely, the overseer of the genetic engineers is this guy that's referred to as the covering cherub of Eden. So we know his race, he's a cherub. Most people know him as the Satan or devil, which means slanderer and deceiver. So we have this off-planet entity which was involved in our genetic engineering. Guess what? He's probably involved in genetic engineering throughout the whole third dimension. Every Earth-like planet, more than likely, has life on it and is waiting for the children of God to go inhabit them. Now, this was all set up. Now, here's the thing. Yahweh is more than likely, what we call the God particle, is more than likely pure dynamic energy or antimatter. So we can't have direct contact with antimatter in the physical world. Guess what? Zap, there we go. No one can see the face of God and yet live. So you look at it from that standpoint, and in every dimension, it springs off the zero dimension, which indeed that zero dimension is Yahweh, where we get our soul from, which indeed is the soul of the whole multiverse and causes life on everything. So we're all connected. And that's the biggest secret that we're not supposed to know. Because if we find out that secret, we'll all be awake and say, hey, I'm taking back my divine power, and these guys have no power over us. You guys have a nice, fine day. Play with the sheeple, and the more that wake up, the merrier. And that's where we are right now, and we can look at biblical prophecy and prove this. Here's the thing. Revelation 16 verses 12 through 16 is very interesting. It talks about the waters of the Euphrates being dried up. Now, what city is on the water of the Euphrates? Baghdad. Who's the power of Baghdad? Saddam Hussein. It talks about that these waters are dried up, making way for the kings from the rising of the sun. Where's the rising of the sun? Persia, Russia, China. Oh, India, the BRICS countries. How about that? Let's go a little further. It says that the great dragon, the false prophet, which is not the church, it's the United States and England that is controlled by the Vatican. The false prophet and the wild beast utter three frog-like expressions, which are indeed demonic acts of war. And what have we seen? George Bush Sr., CIA operative, President of the United States, war in Baghdad. George W. Bush, the World Trade Center. I thought some guys in Afghanistan did it, but we're in war in Baghdad. The river, the power of the Euphrates was dried up. We got the Patriot Bill, and the timeline seemed to go in their favor. Obama, well, Alfred, as you recall, we did an interview back in the beginning of September where we said, beware the false flag attack in September and beware the stock market crash in October. Well, there really wasn't much of a false flag attack, except that for the third time, the third frog spoke. And the third frog is the United Nations, which endorsed a world war against terrorism, starting with ISIS, and against Ebola. We got that. And there's a coalition of nations trying to deal with both ISIS and Ebola.
A world war against terrorism seems like an oxymoron or something.
Yeah, it's keeping people on the negative timeline.
Yeah.
You see what they're doing? They're fighting to keep these people there, and we're exposing what's going on and saying, hey, the negative timeline is wrapped up in beta. The beta, you know why they beta test stuff? To figure out what's wrong with it. So they
both
turn around and they
ISIS
beta
and
test
Ebola
it.
are
So
false
the end of
flags,
this
and
beta
both
test is
started up
over.
in September. So that timeline is there now, and we're just at the beginning of October. Well, today's October 10th. So what's your prediction for October? Right.
Well, it's already underway, Alfred. As of today, the
Yeah.
stock market
Yeah.
pretty
Which
much gave
is
back all its gains for the
it's
year.
all smoke and
People
mirrors. They're
and
doing
based on the fear
this
of
is all
Ebola.
they're using the prophecies as their playbook.
Oh, hold on, Alfred, hold on. We've got to make a slight correction here. The prophecies are seeing what they are doing. It's not that they're using the prophecies. The prophecies are a vision into the future that shows us what they are doing.
Yeah, but if they're doing it and they know what the prophecies are, and they have known what the prophecies are, and their leader, the Eternal Ones, Archons, Anunnaki, whatever you want to call them, they know what the prophecies are, and they can manipulate the timeline.
No, they can't. They can't manipulate the timeline.
But
That
they are doing it now.
they're trying to manipulate the timeline to the best of their ability, but they can't. We are on the positive timeline.
Okay, well, they're trying
Their
to
timeline
influence
comes to an
things.
end. Absolutely, they are.
And one of the elements of the script is the prophecies as they saw them from the perspective of the old timeline, so that they took HARP and they created all their stuff, and they thought, because they did that chronovisor probe to Washington D.C. and and it was reported back to them that the U.S. Supreme Court building was under 100 feet of brackish water. So Richard M. Nixon, who was president of the United States at that time, and Donald H. Rumsfeld, who was in charge of the chronovisor program from the defense point of view, and Henry Kissinger, who was the national security advisor, approved $2 to $3 trillion to do all the deep underground bases so that all the financial and political elite and all of their military infrastructure could go underground. Did I get blocked again?
And here's the fulfillment of a prophecy.
We're going to go back to what he said about elite as soon as he comes back.
So I'm
reminding you.
Okay.
Yes, you did. You were talking about the elite.
Elite and underground bases, Alfred.
Yeah. So it's the national.
Yes.
More than likely, yes.
It's the National Soccer Association, correct?
Secure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Or maybe the National Suckers Association, one or the other. But anyway, this is a very important point. The diversion of this money to build these underground bases, because you can go back to Revelation, and here's where they may try to manipulate the timeline. But when you go to Revelation 6, verses 12 through 17, it says that they call out to the mountains and the rock masses to cover them over. And who is the they? The kings, the military commanders, the mighty men, the captains of industry, all of those guys. And that's what they're doing. They're going to these deep underground bases. And it ends in verse 17, which says, "But who can hide from the Lamb and the one seated upon the throne?" You can't. You can run, but you can't hide.
Right. But regarding, I was just going to say, regarding the bases, who's running the show? Because it seems like if you read the Dulce book and all the other stuff, and some of it's crazy, yes, but it seems like they're telling us what to do.
I.e.,
Alfred,
from a certain point of view, the Draco. See, there's a lot of different actors happening. One set of actors is the Anunnaki, who land 300,000 years ago. Actually went there thanks to Michael Tellinger to Adam's calendar, and you see there's all these stone circles and this sacred calendric site. And you see that goes all the way up to Zimbabwe in southern Africa. Okay.
Hang on really quick. This is the next little show, open discussion. We'll be back right after this. And Zimbabwe, remember what you were saying. Write it down because I want to pick it up. Hang on.